This rusted iron boat we boarded. It's a living thing that eats people. Just now, its deck sprouted thousands of teeth and peeled a layer of skin right off my teammate's back in an instant. To dodge those crazed, chomping steel jaws in the corridor outside, we ran for our lives and slammed open a heavy watertight iron door. When Reeves dragged Collins in, his back scraped a bloody streak across the doorframe. I shut the door. As the iron sealed shut, the sound of those teeth grinding outside was cut off instantly. Silence. Just the three of us breathing and Collins' teeth grinding together with a faint creak. I stripped off his tactical vest. The vest's lining was soaked through with blood. When I lifted it, it dripped. I tore open the med kit, jabbed a morphine syringe into the muscle at the back of his neck, and pushed the plunger all the way. His shoulders relaxed, and the glove fell from his mouth, covered in bite marks. The wound on his back was oozing blood. Large areas of dermis were exposed. Every tiny speck of dust in the air that landed on it made his muscles twitch. I pressed sterile gauze over it. The moment the gauze touched his flesh, he let out a muffled groan. Biological contamination, Reeves said, leaning against the console, one leg stretched out, his boot off. 3 bloody holes on the top of his foot were still seeping blood. The crew on this ship got infected with something that drove them all insane. Self-mutilation, operating on each other, welding themselves to the hull. He was talking into the radio. The voice of the mothership's duty officer finally came back, tense, speaking fast, asking for coordinates and casualty reports. Reeves answered each question, his voice flat. I dug coagulant powder out of the first aid kit and sprinkled it over Collins' back. The powder hit the moist dermis and instantly turned into a gel, sealing off the broken capillary ends. The muscles on his back stopped twitching. Reeves finished his report and hung the radio on his chest. The surrounding silence was heavy, thick. I was wrapping bandages around Collins' back with both hands, and I could hear the joints of my fingers moving. A sound came from outside the hull. Asterisk thump. 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 Asterisk, it came from the bottom of the ship. Through several layers of steel, muffled and heavy, but forceful. A few seconds later, another one. Asterisk thump. 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 Asterisk, like something underwater was slapping the hull with its palm. Dull, massive, with a terrifying rhythm. One slap against the bottom, and the whole fishing boat shuddered violently. A wrench on the console slowly slid to my hand. Collins' breathing mixed with the pounding. He inhaled, asterisk thump asterisk. He exhaled, pause. Always in sync. I scanned the entire processing area. A meat grinder, industrial grade, with a feed opening as big as a wash basin, dark inside. No power. The switch was pulled down. The drum inside the feed opening was turning extremely slowly. Hard to notice with the naked eye. You had to stare at one spot for several seconds to see it move. The inner wall of the drum was coated with a layer of dark red rust, and beneath the rust, you could see texture, strands, one after another, aligned with the direction of rotation. Bioelectricity. The ship had no generator running. Below the grinder, at the discharge chute, a drop of liquid fell. Thick, stringy, a murky yellow. It splattered on the floor and spread into a puddle. I nudged the puddle with my foot and found a layer already accumulated underneath, spreading from the machine's base all the way to the drain. When I stepped on it, the soles of my boots were sticky. Reef saw it too. He stared at the machine running on its own, his lips moving without a sound. Then his hand started reaching for his gun. The pounding from the ship's bottom suddenly stopped. The grinder stopped too, the drum frozen halfway, revealing a row of blades inside. On the blades hung shreds of meat, bright red, freshly caught. The iron door to the corridor let out a thump. The inner layer of steel was being pushed from the outside, then released, then pushed again. A layer of clear liquid seeped in under the door crack, fishy, spreading across the floor, pushing aside the blood that had already flowed. The liquid crept slowly toward our feet. The duty officer on the radio started shouting, asking if we were safe, demanding an update. Reeves held the radio, but didn't answer. He was staring at the door. I heard movement in the ventilation duct above my head. First, a breathing sound. Asterisk, whoosh, asterisk. Very slow, sliding from the left side of the duct to the right. I could hear the sound of liquid rolling in a throat, then a metallic clink. Asterisk ding. Asterisk like something was tapping the iron with a bone. Right in the section of duct above us. Reeves raised his gun, aiming the muzzle at the vent. I kept wrapping bandages alone. If I stopped, Collins would bleed. Bandage after bandage, the white cloth quickly soaked red. A brownish-yellow substance began to squeeze out from the gaps in the door's steel plates, emerging bit by bit, like moss growing, but much faster, visible to the naked eye. It climbed up the door panel, coiled around the handle, covered it completely, and the handle started turning on its own, pressing downward. When the handle was halfway down, footsteps came from the corridor. Then someone pounded on the door, fist after fist slamming against the iron. "Open up. Let me in." Chief Engineer. I recognized his voice. He'd been sitting across from me in the pre-boarding briefing, constantly spinning a grease-stained baseball cap in his hands. Reeves yanked the door open, and the chief engineer stumbled inside. Covered in oil, his face smeared with black grime. A huge tear ripped across the chest of his coveralls. He slid down against the door, his eyes fixed on us, pupils shrunk to pinpricks. "Engine room." He managed 2 words before his breath gave out, his atoms apple-bobbing. "The engine room. It's all alive." Reeves crouched down, grabbing his shoulders. "Makes sense." "I can't. You have to see for yourselves. That thing isn't an engine anymore." As he spoke, drool mixed with black oil trickled from the corner of his mouth. I glanced down at his pant legs. Everything below the knees was soaked, fluid dripping down the seams and pooling in a small puddle on the floor. I hoisted Collins up. The bandages on his back were already starting to seep blood, but he was a bit more alert now, able to drape his arm over my shoulder. Reeves dragged the chief engineer along, and the 4 of us pushed open the watertight door leading from the processing area to the lower decks. The entrance to the engine room was below the second deck. The ladder down was narrow, forcing us to descend one by one. I went second, with Collins above me and Reeves bringing up the rear. The further down we went, the stickier the iron handrail became. My palm felt a damp, warm clamminess like gripping a rag just pulled from lukewarm water. When my feet hit the engine room floor, the smell hit me. A bizarre, stewed meat odor assaulted my senses, mixed with a heavy, metallic tang so thick it clogged my throat. The flashlight beam swept across the space. First, the pipes. The entire engine room ceiling was draped with a dense web of them. They should have been coated in gray anti-rust paint, but now they were all a dark, reddish hue, their surfaces bulging with pulsating ridges that converged from the walls toward the center of the room. All the pipes were throbbing, rhythmically, in sync. I followed the pipes downward with the light. On the engine bed, the original diesel engine block was gone. In its place was a massive mass of muscle tissue, filling the entire base space. A dark purple, its surface crisscrossed with veins of varying thickness, green, blue, deep purple, wrapped around it like coarse rope. The entire mass was contracting, squeezing, and releasing. With each contraction, it forced a stream of fluid from those bundled vessels, pumping it upward through the pipes. The muscle surface was sweating. A layer of oily secretion clung to it, dripping down along the grain of the muscle fibers. The chief engineer pointed a trembling finger beneath the muscle mass. "The crankshaft. Look at the crankshaft." The flashlight beam shifted. Connecting rods extended one by one from the muscle tissue, linking to the propeller's drive shaft. As the light swept over them, the rods gleamed a sickly white. They were human femurs. Thigh bones. Stout human thigh bones, their articular ends worn smooth and shiny, seated in cast iron bearing housings. With each contraction of the muscle, the femur connecting rods pushed the drive shaft one rotation, which in turn drove the propeller. The sound of bone grinding against iron was low, muffled a grating creak groan, each scrape clawing at our eardrums. One of the femur rods had a metal bracket fixed to it. A screw had been driven straight through the cortical bone, protruding from the other side, the nut embedded in the pale, spongy bone marrow. Cracks radiated from the drill hole across the bone surface, a fine, web-like pattern like crazing on a porcelain bowl. At the heart of the massive muscle mass, A cavity was sunken in. A human shape bulged outward from within it. A man buried in the muscle from the chest down, his two arms still exposed, fingers still twitching. His chest had been forced open by the muscle tissue, ribs splayed outward, each one broken, jutting from his thoracic cavity with jagged ends. His own heart had been pushed outside the splayed ribs, hanging in the center of his chest, swollen, dark red, still beating. This man was the one we'd seen earlier in the wall, the crewman half embedded in the steel plate. The same person. I remembered his face. He'd already been swallowed by the ship once, and now he was here. His eyes were open, his gaze shifting toward us. His mouth opened, a sound issuing from his throat, his lips moving in sync with the beating of his heart. Then I saw the ID tag hanging on his chest. Cyrillic script, mostly obscured by blood and grime, but the photo on it was still clear. The photo from the duty roster. One of the 9 crewmen. Valentine. Valentine's lips parted, closed. He was speaking. Hell, pee me. The words were squeezed from his chest. With each forced syllable, the heart hanging outside his body gave a violent thump, squeezing a gush of blood from a fissure in the atrium, splattering onto his own chin. I took a step back, my heel landing on a pipe. The pipe pulsed beneath my foot. Once, twice, the pressure pushing up from within palpable even through my boot. The entire ship's power relied on the hydraulic pressure surging upward through these pipes, and the source of that pressure was this man's heartbeat. The pipe overhead suddenly burst. A tube split at its joint, and a torrent of dark red blood mixed with yellow-green digestive fluid poured down from the ceiling, its temperature exactly that of human body heat. It splashed over the back of my neck, seeping under my collar, thick, viscous, and dripping. My hair plastered to my scalp. A few drops splashed into my eyes, stinging, salty, and metallic. Reeves yanked me backward. The chief engineer had already collapsed to the floor, weeping. Collins leaned against the wall, the bandages on his back soaked through, fluid trickling down his belt. I wiped the liquid from my face and swept the flashlight beam back across the walls of the engine room. Those things I had mistaken for barnacles were now opening and closing. White shells, each containing a translucent, gelatinous mass with a single black dot at its center, a lens. Those white shells weren't encasing mollusks at all. They were sacks of viscous tissue with lenses, hundreds, thousands of eyeballs, densely packed from floor to ceiling across the iron walls, all fixed intently on us. Every pupil simultaneously focused on the flashlight beam. Thousands of tiny black dots contracted to pinpricks. Valentine let out a cry from within a muscle. It was forced from his chest, torn, rasping. Every pipe in the engine room tensed simultaneously, shuddering from end to end. Then, the barnacle eyes on the walls abruptly stopped their rhythmic opening and closing. Each one froze, their pupils swiveling in unison toward the starboard side. Asterisk thump, thump thump. Asterisk the starboard iron wall of the engine room began to seep water. Droplets coalesced along rust trails into rivulets, trickling downward. A bulge swelled on the steel plate, round, taller than a man, pushing outward from within, making the metal screech and groan. The bulge grew larger. The steel stretched to a pale white, its surface paint flaking off in chunks. The bulge split open. What flowed from the crack was seawater, and behind the seawater, a hand was concealed. The chief engineer scrambled to his feet. The muscle beneath his right eye twitched incessantly, pulling his entire face askew. He yanked the backpack from his shoulder, tore the zipper open. Inside were maintenance tools and 2 white phosphorus grenades. Before I could move, he had already pulled out a grenade and yanked the pin. The safety spoon flew off with a sharp, metallic ping. The white phosphorus incendiary inside hissed, emitting a wisp of white smoke. He screamed, his voice utterly shattered, like scraping iron with broken glass, swinging his arm back, twisting his entire upper body, and hurling the grenade into the cluster of vessels within the muscle mass. The grenade flew, tumbling twice in the air before striking the dark purple muscle. The layer of sweat on the muscle's surface sizzled into vapor. The grenade sank in. The muscle tissue didn't catch fire. Instead, it simply depressed into a crater at the point of contact, surrounding muscle fibers tightening in thick bundles, enveloping the pit. The grenade continued to hiss and burn inside, the pungent, garlic-like stench of white phosphorus seeping through the vaporized sweat. Then, asterisk thump asterisk, a muffled sound like a firecracker exploding inside a thick quilt. The grenade went out. Only a wisp of bluish smoke remained. The chief engineer stood frozen, his arms still in the throwing position. Immediately, all the vessels on the muscle's surface bulged. A surge of dark red fluid pumped upward from the muscle's base, pushing outward along the pipes, the sound of hydraulic pressure skyrocketing, a series of sharp, cracking snaps. Inside the muscle, Valentine's mouth stretched to its limit, his jaw dislocated, emitting a low-frequency, guttural growl. Every barnacle eye on the wall turned toward the chief engineer, thousands of black pupils dilating in unison, then contracting. All the walls of the engine room began to press inward simultaneously, accompanied by a teeth-grating screech of twisting metal. The steel plates on the walls were being forced inward, pushed by the madly proliferating dark red muscle tissue growing from within. The muscle squeezed out from the welded seams, bright red, glistening, trailing viscous strands. One wall, two walls, all four walls, the ceiling, the floor, every steel plate began to bulge outward. The bulges grew larger. The metal stretched to its breaking point, showing pale stress marks. Then the steel split. The tiers were jagged, like ripped paper, edges curling inward. From within the tiers, that flesh squeezed out. Chunks, masses of it, dark red, veined with blue, crawling along the walls toward us. Countless steel rebars stabbed out from the ceiling and walls. Rusted, threaded rebar, their ends sharp, dangling rust flakes and dried remnants of blood vessels. They extended outward not quickly, but steadily, one after another, pushed out from the muscle, their steel tips aimed at us, spiraling forward. One of the thickest plunged down from the ceiling directly in front of the chief engineer, aimed straight at his gut. When he looked down, the tip of the rebar had already reached just above the buckle of his tactical belt. The buckle was plastic. It shattered with a sharp crack. The steel tip plunged into the combat uniform over his abdomen. The sound of Kevlar fibers straining to their limit before tearing was crisp, like ripping canvas. The steel drove into flesh, entering 3 fingers width above his navel and bursting out through his lower back, trailing a length of intestine and a fragment of spinal disc. The chief engineer was pinned in place, impaled. His feet still touched the ground, his knees buckling, then straightening again, his joints seizing with cramps. Blood gushed simultaneously from the 2 holes in his abdomen, front and back, streaming down the rebar onto the steel deck, where it sizzled and sent up wisps of white steam. Then the rebar began to rust. Starting from the edges of the impaled wound, his skin peeled outward. The exposed subcutaneous fat and muscle tissue rapidly dried out, their color shifting from bright red to brownish red, then to a dark, muddy brown. The rust spread along the rebar, burrowing deeper into his body and creeping outward across his skin. The edges of his wound crusted over with a brittle, thin layer of iron oxide, the crust thickening and spreading, crawling over his ribs, climbing toward his collarbone. The skin across his chest followed, turning the same rusted iron hue. Beneath it, his network of blood vessels dried up one by one, becoming blackened lines. His rectus abdominis muscles still contracted as the rust consumed them. Each spasm shattered a patch of the crust, revealing a deeper layer of rust beneath. The entire process took less than a minute. His mouth hung open, trying to scream, but his throat was filled with a gurgling, liquid sound. The rust crept over his neck, his chin, his lips. His tongue twitched once inside his mouth. Then a yellowish-brown rust bloomed across its surface. It fell still, rigid, the entire tongue now the color of iron oxide. He stood in the center of the engine room, a statue of rusted iron encasing bone and rotting flesh. The rebar remained lodged in his gut, The most heavily rusted section now fused completely with his flesh, indistinguishable where metal ended and he began. Reeves grabbed me by the collar and hauled me up from the deck. Move! We dragged Collins toward the stairwell. The fleshy padding on the floor had reached our heels. Stepping on it was soft, slick, and warm. Collins slipped several times underfoot. Each time he stumbled, the bandages on his back scraped against the wall, peeling away clots of coagulated blood and exposing the raw dermis still oozing beneath. Up the stairs, Reeves pushed Collins up first, then me. As he followed, a tendril of muscle slithered up through the gaps in the steps and wrapped around his ankle. He tried to pull his boot free, but the muscle stretched like a rubber band. I drew my knife, crouched, and sliced through it. The severed end snapped back, spraying a stream of yellow-green fluid before retracting into the gap beneath the steps. For it had become 3. The chief engineer was gone. I no longer had the energy to keep count. We crouched in the passage outside the engine room, gasping for breath. The carrier's radio crackled with new orders, the duty officer's voice trembling badly. Carrier has locked onto the hull. Detecting irreversible structural collapse ship-wide. Naval guns will open fire in 15 minutes. All personnel evacuate immediately. Repeat, all personnel evacuate immediately. Reeves grabbed the radio and replied, "Copy. Evacuating now." I crouched beside him, staring at a pulsating pipe running along the passage wall. It extended from the engine room toward the bow, throbbing once per second, pumping the fluid from Valentine's heart throughout the ship. My eyes followed the pipe's path deeper into the corridor. It branched, thinned, and burrowed into every bulkhead. That heart in the engine room was the engine driving the propeller. The rhythmic pulse in the pipes matched the beating we'd first heard on the sonar recording. Beneath the ship's hull were buried 9 crew members. 9 hearts, 9 pumps. The propeller was driven by Valentine alone. Where had the other 8 heartbeats gone? I sheathed my knife and stood. We have to go back. Reeves turned to look at me. Dried specks of the chief engineer's blood dotted his face, now crusted into tiny scabs. That crewman, the one in the berthing compartment, half embedded in the wall. He's connected to the ship. The ship is feeding off him. Valentine in the engine room was absorbed too. They're parts of a ship. I pointed to the pulsating pipe overhead. If we sever the connection points in the walls, the hydraulic pressure will stop. The muscles will lose tension. The propeller will completely fail, and the carrier can lock onto us immediately. I paused. We're down to 3, 2 wounded. To reach the extraction point on deck, we have to cover the distance in 15 minutes, including climbing 2 sets of stairs. The ship has turned against us. You felt the deck growing teeth earlier. We won't make it in 15 minutes. Reeves stared at me. But if the propeller stops, the ship can't move. If the ship can't move, the carrier has time to wait for us. More importantly, if that heart in the engine room stops, the entire ship's pressure system collapses. And if the pressure system collapses, these walls, these pipes will stop pulsing. They'll stop growing things. Collins sat slumped against the wall, his lips pale from blood loss, but his eyes were still open. He listened, then pulled his M4 from its holster, racked the slide with a sharp clack, and turned his face toward the corridor ahead. Then we go back and cut it. The way back had become a dead end. The only way to stop this mad ship was to sever the neural connection between the man fused to the wall and the vessel itself. But the moment we turned, the blood-filled pipe overhead let out a piercing, boiling shriek, and the walls of the entire corridor began to spray blood.